So we are starting to come down to the last little bit of this series that we've been doing, Big Church. And I know some people are like, oh, thank God. Because let's be honest, this has not been the most comfortable series in the world. Because we've been taking and tearing apart this idea that the church lives in a complete 100% state of mistaken identity. The world that we live in, they know what a Christian is supposed to look like. And most people, if you ask them on the street, hey, are you a Christian? They would probably say, well, yeah, I'm a Christian, because they don't really know what it is. Now, for us, within the church, we know that there's a distinct difference between what a Christian is and what the world thinks a Christian is. And we started off in the very first week by looking at it saying, we're something a little bit different. In 1 Peter 2:11, we see that this world is not our home. We are aliens here. We're not supposed to be comfortable here. We're not supposed to set in place and make a home for us. And in Acts chapter 9, we see right after the resurrection and the ascension into heaven that the early believers are called followers of the way, because Jesus defined himself as the way, the truth, and the life. So people who followed his teachings were followers of the way. And a couple of chapters later in Antioch in the book of Acts, we see the term Christian used for the first time. And it started to become this labeling place for who Christians were. And that's where we begin to see the identity of the church begin to take shape. This idea that we are supposed to be following something that is countercultural, and something that we're given an identity based on who we modeled as being Christians. And so what are we supposed to be modeling? And, we even saw the very first week that Jesus began to lay the foundation of what we're supposed to be doing and who he was, all the way back in Matthew chapter 16 in verse 18. Jesus is talking to Peter, and Peter's acknowledged who he believes Jesus to be, and Jesus responds with, I tell you that you are Peter, and on that statement of your belief of who I am, I will build my church, the ecclesia, the worldwide gathering that will be a movement that will adjust and alter the way that reality in the world at large functions. And along the way, somewhere we got this idea that Christianity is a religion, and it's not. It's a movement. And the basic difference is that religions are geared around rules and regulations, whereas movements are geared towards taking and changing something that is seen as being fundamentally wrong in the culture. And in this instance, it was the way that people were relating to God was fundamentally wrong. So Jesus came to correct course and send us on. And so at the very end of week 1, we came down to this idea that the church is something much bigger than just us. You guys, individually as Jesus followers, are part of something much bigger than just Sweetwater. It goes way beyond that. And as part of that, we find ourselves in situations sometimes where we just go, I don't belong here. And generally in our world, what we do is when we get uncomfortable, we start fighting to fit in. We start fighting to look the part, to sound the part, to dress the part. And that's where we as believers kind of start to go wrong. And we kind of looked at a passage of scripture real quick in Romans chapter 12, where Paul actually says, listen, don't be conformed. Do not be conformed to this world. Don't allow yourself to get pressed into that mold. Be different. Your worldview as a Christian and as a believer should be different. As Christians, as followers of the way, we're supposed to think differently. We're supposed to see things from a different standpoint. We are called to be different, so we should look different. Now, we ended that week by saying that we begin as believers to lose credibility when we look just like the world. The church loses its impact, it loses its influence. And when that begins to happen, we start laying out expectations on people. And when those expectations aren't met, we as Christians tend to pass judgment on them. And the problem isn't that we pass judgment. The problem comes in with who we begin to pass judgment on. We're called to pass judgment and hold people accountable within the church. But then in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, we looked at a passage of scripture where Paul is writing to the church in Corinth, and he says, listen, what do I have to do with judging outsiders? Why on the earth am I judging outsiders? They've not agreed to the same standards that we have. In fact, God judges those outside the church. It's my responsibility to hold the people inside the church who say they believe a certain thing accountable. And so we ended by looking at it saying, listen, we say judge anyone that's not like me, but Paul says that you're supposed to judge the believing, not the heathen. You're supposed to judge and hold accountable the people who say they believe the same way we do. And by doing that, it forces us to verify what our identity is. And that when we get into that place, it's kind of a weird spot for us because, in real life, when we're asked to verify who we are, we give a driver's license, we give a social security card, we give date of birth, all that kind of stuff. But in the church world, we don't have a disciple card that we can hand out and say, this is who I am. We have to go a little bit different route, and we have to understand what that looks like. And in John chapter 13, Jesus gives us the idea of who we are. He says, by this one thing, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. And it's this idea of not an emotional kind of love that we say, oh, well, I love my wife. No, it's the word that they use for love there is more geared towards this goodwill idea. That if I have in just genuine goodwill for the people around me, and I have their best interest, and I help them reach that place where their best interests are known, then I will have verified my identity. Okay? And we started looking at this idea that the world knows who we are. They know what we're supposed to look like, but we have to prove them wrong. We have to prove them wrong because when we get into this whole thing of making disciples, if we don't have love, then we're wasting our time. Without love at the forefront and as that driving force, then we're wasting our time. We cannot make disciples if we don't do the things that we do while being clothed and draped in love. And then last week we started looking at this thing and we said, you know what? We like the world most of the time. But there are certain things that happen that we just kind of push back and go, that's it, I'm done. And we segregate ourselves from the world. And we've done it for so long that it's caused this disengagement between the church and culture and the church and society. And the church has become viewed as being anti-everything fun by the people that live in the world. And what we've done is we've done it for so long that we forgot what we're supposed to be. Jesus says that we are salt, we are light. If we're not engaged in the world, if we're not engaged in relationships with people outside the church, we cannot do the things that salt and light are supposed to do. Salt enhances, salt preserves. Salt actually can even be a healing agent if it's applied just right. Light can be that thing that opens up our eyes to see what's really there versus what we think is there. But it can also, if it's not done carefully, can be a blinding agent that pushes people away from what they need to be able to see. And so we talked about this idea last week. We're salt, we add flavor, we preserve, we bring light, we expose the hidden things. And that it really, when we get down to it, we have to understand that just a pinch of salt and a glimpse of light can go a long way. Just those two little things, if it's done right, can make a huge impact. Now, I'm going to ask you another question real quick, okay? Have you ever reached a place where you wanted to walk up to somebody, grab them by their shirt collars, and say, "You idiot"? Ever wanted to do that? Let's be honest. We've all been there. We've all got these things where we just want to walk up to somebody sometimes and just slap them. Because we see what's going on. We understand what's going on. It doesn't matter if they're in the church or outside of the church. They're doing something stupid. Let's be honest. They do something stupid and you want to go up and you just want to smack the stupid out of them. Or you want to go up and you want to grab them and just be like, do you understand what you're doing? Do you understand what ramifications this is going to have? Do you understand? We want to get them, we want to do something that will shock them in a way that will make them back up from what they're doing. And typically, this is not the people inside the church that we do this to. This is the people outside of the church. We've all been there. Listen, when I was in high school, man, I thought I was going to just light the world up for Jesus. There were people that I went to school with that we would sit there and we'd go to cast parties and stuff for the spring musicals, or we would be just hanging out, going to chorus concerts and stuff. And I'd see it, I'd be listening to them do their thing, and I'd be sitting there and I'd be quiet. And then they'd ask me my opinion. I think you're dumb. Why in the... Do you realize how dumb that is what you're doing? And I did, man. I would lay into them. And then something happened. I got into college, and I had this friend of mine who was a vocal major. He was a singer. And I don't even know if I'm sure he remembers this, but I know him well enough to know that he would not mind me telling you about this because we laugh about it now. But he decided he was going to go get a piercing. And he thought it was great. But what happened was he got his tongue pierced as a singer. And he couldn't even speak. Every time he would try to speak, the ball on the top of it would hit his teeth and would click against him. And I was like, really, dude? How dumb do you have to be? You're a vocal. You can't even speak right now. You can't even hardly talk, and you're a singer. Well, he left. And a couple of minutes later, one of my roommates, who was also a good friend of ours, came in, and I'm sitting on the couch, and he's like, what's wrong with, we'll just call him Toby. He said, what's wrong with Toby? Well, what do you mean what's wrong with Toby? Well, he's sitting in his car crying. What do you mean he's in his car? No, dude, he's like in his car. He's got his hands his head in his hands, and he's crying. I was like, oh. Well, I guess that would be my fault. It's all fun and games to do that, and it makes us feel really good when we stand up for the things that we just feel are like, you have no idea what you're doing. I see what you see, and we just come at it, and we're harsh, and we just blast, and we just put them on blast on level 10, and we just lay into them. It makes us feel really good until you're on the receiving end of it. To have somebody come in and blast you, telling you how dumb you are. See, we tend to take this idea of accountability and we run with it. We tell them everything they're doing wrong, and we tell them exactly what we think. We don't hold anything back. And then somebody tries to hold us accountable for the way that we talk. And we say, no, whoa, no, Jesus was harsh with people, so I can be harsh with people because I'm just being how Jesus was. Because Jesus told it how it was. And the Bible is full of places where Jesus just dropped the holy hammer down. Matthew chapter 12, verse 34 opens up like this. He's sitting there, he's talking to the religious leaders, and he just pops out, he says, you brood of vipers. It's more literally translated into, you sons of snakes. And he goes on in Matthew chapter 23, verses 16 and 17 and 23, he says, woe to you, you blind guys, you blind fools. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites. And then he goes on even into another place, all the way in Luke chapter 11, he says, woe to you, for you are like unmarked graves. He goes in and he just hammers them and says, man, you guys, you're supposed to know better. You're just nothing better than a bunch of snakes. You're hypocrites. And you're nothing better than unmarked graves. Now, for us, that doesn't mean a whole lot, the whole unmarked graves thing, because we're like, well, those are all over the place. But these guys were the religious leaders. They were the ones that were supposed to have a special place in terms of God. They were the ones who were supposed to have life flowing out of them and are supposed to have this wellspring inside of them of who God was. And he just looks at him and says, listen, you guys are no different than an unmarked grave. Nobody really understands or knows who you are, and you're actually just completely dead on the inside. Wow, that's pretty harsh. And if that wasn't bad enough, there's even another story where Jesus walks up to the temple and he comes into the court, and there's people standing around and they're selling things for the offerings that are supposed to happen and the sacrifices that are supposed to happen. And so what does Jesus do? He looks around and he goes, oh, isn't this quaint? No, he goes and he grabs some stuff and he makes a whip and he starts smacking people with it, kicking tables over, running people out. Jesus was the man. He just wasn't going to take it. He's kind of like Dee Snider from Twisted Sister. They're just not going to take it anymore. And they go in and he goes in and he kicks everything over and he does this. And these are the things that people remember as Christians about what Jesus did. And when we decide it's time for us to hold somebody accountable, this is where we run to. There's nothing wrong with holding people accountable. Hear that. There's nothing wrong with holding people accountable. We're supposed to. As believers, if there is somebody that is another professing believer, it is our responsibility to hold them accountable. But too many times what the world sees is us laying in with the truth of what's happening without any love behind it. Now remember, we were told that people would know us by the way that we loved each other, right? And we were told that we're supposed to hold each other in the church accountable. Somewhere along the way, we divorced the two. Because it's easier to go at somebody with truth, but not grace. See, this is the side of Jesus that we miss. We love the truth side, but we forget about the grace. We forget about the mercy. And I know the last couple of weeks have been kind of feeling a little bit beat up and all that kind of stuff when we walk out of here, but you know what? I want to encourage us. I want to encourage you guys. Listen, Jesus was the king of telling it like it was. He absolutely, everywhere he went, if somebody tried to pull something over on him, he was like, whoa, wait. No. We're told to model him, so we run with it. We do the same thing, and we're only half right with it. See, there's more to Jesus than what a lot of times we're willing to accept, because it means making ourselves uncomfortable a little bit. I want us to look at just 3 really quick passages of Scripture, and what we're going to do is I'm going to read one, and then we're going to stop, okay? And we're going to take a look at this for just a second, okay? The first one's in John chapter 8, and I want to set the background of what's happening here. Some of you, as soon as I said John chapter 8, you may know exactly where we're going. But Jesus is sitting, he's in the courtyard, and he's hanging out with his disciples, and he's teaching. And the religious leaders, they bring him this woman. They say, all right, she was caught in adultery by law. She should be stoned. So give us the word. What do you want us to do with her? And he crouches down and he starts scribbling in the sand. And he stands back up and he says, okay, you're right. The truth of the matter is this. She should be stoned. But I want to take a different direction with this. Whichever one of you is without sin, go ahead and throw the first stone. And he crouches back down and goes back to what he was doing. Now for us, we get to that part of, yes, they messed up, they're wrong, they should be held accountable. But in the very next 2 verses, Jesus looks around at her and he says, who here, are none of your accusers left? And she turns around and she says, well, no one, Lord. And then he says this, in John 8:11, he says, well then, okay. I don't condemn you either. But I want you to do something for me. Just go. But then from now on, don't do this again. He knows the truth. He knows what's supposed to happen. He knows what the law requires. But he takes it a step further and he says, okay, listen, yes, accountability, we know the laws, but just stop. Okay? Well, then in Luke 22, we see this whole thing set up, and Jesus is sitting there with his apostles, his disciples, and they're sitting there, and he's saying, I'm going to be where I'm going. You can't go. I'm going to be betrayed. And Peter pops up and says, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to be there with you. And at that moment, Jesus very easily could have just laid into him like, Peter, you're a dummy. But he pops up and in verse 34, he says, Peter, listen, the rooster is not going to crow until you've denied me 3 times. 3 times you're going to deny that you even know me. if I knew somebody was going to turn their back on me, it would be really hard for me to exercise any kind of grace, any kind of mercy, any kind of, I've been there. I've been in those shoes. And it took years for me to be able to exercise any amount of grace whatsoever. We think about stuff like that, and it's like, okay, that's good. I understand that. But what about people who just, it's the last minute before they even try to even accomplish anything with it. That surely God's going to, okay, let's back up a little bit. Or not back up, let's go forward in time even from here a little bit, okay? So the rooster crows. The rooster has crowed 3 times. Peter is sitting there, and now he's curled up in the corner in the fetal position crying because he realized Jesus knew exactly what was going to happen. Jesus goes on trial. He's beat beyond recognition as a man. They start taking him to be crucified. And as he goes, there's 2 criminals. We don't know for sure what their crime was, but it was something horrible enough that they were being crucified for it. So it was a capital crime of some kind. Okay, one of them is taunting Jesus, and he says, listen, if you're really who you say you are, then just get us off of here. Get us down from here. Just make it happen. If you're really who you say you are, then you can keep this from happening. Which would have been enough for me to be like, you're an idiot. Jesus doesn't even have to say a word. Doesn't even have to speak, because the other thief says, you don't understand. You don't get it. Just hush. He didn't do anything to deserve what he's getting. But us, we deserve everything that we're getting. And in Luke 23, verse 42, he says, Jesus, remember me when you get to your heaven. Remember me when you get into your kingdom. And Jesus said to him, truly I say to you that today you'll be with me in paradise. Jesus had every right and every ability to be able to say, no, wait, back up. No. But this is the thing that we miss about Jesus. Jesus was the absolute perfection of grace and truth. He was the perfect balance of it. He was the perfect blend of grace and truth. Back several years ago, there was this big movement that started happening, and people were wearing these little cloth bracelets, and they went from being cloth bracelets to like rubber bracelets and t-shirts and hats and necklaces and probably tennis shoes that had these 4 letters on it. And if you remember, you can say it with me. It was W, W, J, D. What would Jesus do? Okay? This was the question that we were told we should ask ourselves as Christians before we responded at any moment. What would Jesus do? What would Jesus do? What would Jesus do? Well, Christians took that and ran with it as a license to say, well, in this instance, well, Jesus would just tell them the truth. And it started out as something draped in love. And then it continued to move on and become more and more and more, not abusive, but abrasive. Because as social media especially began to take root and grow bigger and bigger and bigger, we got used to being able to say things without there being any kind of consequence to it. And so you start seeing text messaging, instant messaging, chat rooms, and social media like platforms like MySpace, Facebook, and all these other places that have popped up where you could speak without having to look someone in the eye. And it became very easy to speak with truth, but no grace. And what happened over the course of time was our churches began to mimic the same thing. We kept trying to want to find this place where we could mimic who Jesus was and mirror who it was. And so we decided as Christians and as gathering believers how we were going to be. And so you ended up with churches that were so heavy on the truth that they forgot about the grace side of things because grace was messy and hard. Or you ended up with a church that was so heavy on the grace side of stuff that they missed out on the truth side of stuff. And they left out the truth side of stuff because guess what? The truth is messy and hard. It's uncomfortable. Showing grace to somebody who isn't like you is messy and hard because it means you've got to get in their life and be a part of what's going on. You have to build a relationship with them. Speaking the truth is messy and hard because it means potentially shearing off a relationship with someone that you care about and that you love. But this is the moment where Jesus would say, guys, you're missing it. It's not just about the truth. It's not just about the grace. You've got to marry the two together because this is who I am. I am the perfection of grace and truth and love. And it may not make sense because that means taking two ideas that are seemingly completely unrelated and bringing them together. But then again, so is the Trinity, this idea of a father and a son and an intangible thing being the same thing. Somewhere along the way, Christians kind of pulled away from being the grace side of stuff and leaned into the truth, trying to be as much like Jesus as possible. And you may say, well, now wait a minute, Tim. You said you weren't going to beat us up. I'm not going to beat you up. I'm not beating you up at all. And here's where the difference is. Okay. As a church, Christ designed us to be that marriage of grace and truth. Just like the human body was created to be a combination of the physical and the spiritual, we are designed as human beings to be the marriage of two things. And as Christians, we are called to be the marriage of two things: grace and truth. Well, if as disciples we're supposed to be mimicking Jesus and mirroring Jesus, how do we get there? Well, it comes from understanding what the Jewish concept of disciples was. Okay? We think of disciples merely as just being students. Someone teaches, we take information in, we learn it, we put it into practice. That's what we think of as disciples. Being a disciple in Jewish culture was something completely different. It was spending so much time with your teacher, your rabbi, whoever that person was that you were discipling under, whether it was for a trade or whether it was in a religious setting. It was this taking of their ideas and marrying it to the ideas of what you believed so that you could become almost a carbon copy of the person you were following. But the only way you could do that was by spending as much time as possible with the person who was discipling you. It's impossible to become a copy of the person discipling you if you only spend 5 minutes a day with them. Okay? Transformation doesn't happen in just 5 minutes a day. It doesn't matter if you're just changing your eating habits for 5 minutes a day. It doesn't matter if you're just doing 5 minutes of exercise. Transformation doesn't happen unless you put obscene amounts of time into making it happen. Okay, so if Jesus was the perfection, that marriage of grace and truth, and we're called to be a mirror of Jesus, marrying that to who we are, then how do we do it? The Great Commission said to go into the world and make disciples. Well, based on that, if you're a Jesus follower, guess what? You're a disciple. Well, wait a minute, but my name's not John or Peter or Paul or, no. I'm not talking about those disciples, but you are a direct descendant of the Great Commission. You are here because the people that were there when Jesus told them and gave them their marching orders, you are a direct result of people who lived out a marriage of grace and truth. Let that sink in for a second. You are here because somebody showed somebody else a perfect marriage of grace and truth. I don't get it. You don't have to get it. That's where faith steps in. Jesus called us to love people the way that he loved people. which means showing them that perfect balance of grace and truth, showing them truth when they need it, but also extending grace when it was needed as well. And sharing truth draped and clothed in love. So what does that mean for us? Well, it means this. We have to shift up the way that we do things on a personal level. Because even though the ecclesia, the church as a whole, is called to be that same marriage of grace and truth, you individually are also called to be that blend of grace and truth. Well, I just don't think you probably can't. In fact, I guarantee you that you can't. You know why? Because you're not as good as you think you are. And I'm nowhere near as good as I want to believe I am. In fact, Jesus says there's no one good, only the Father. And the only way that we can learn to love people the way that He does and exercise grace and truth in a way that alters the life of people is by spending as much time as we can with Him. Because we are disciples, and it's His teachings that we're learning from. The sooner that we can understand that the closer that we are to Him, the more like Him we become, the better off we'll be. I have no idea what your spiritual life, what your relationship with God looks like outside these four walls. I don't. But I would venture to say that every single one of us that's a Jesus follower would say, well, I want to be more like Jesus. I want to be more like Jesus. I want to be more like Jesus. I want to love more like Him. I want to be seen like Him. I want to have the same impact on the world that He did. Great. Then spend some time with Him. And I'm not talking about 5 minutes here and there. I'm talking about legitimate time where you sit down and say, Jesus, I want to get to know you. You know, we just had Valentine's Day, okay? The one day out of the year that people set aside and say, I'm going to show you how much I love you. In the church, we have 2 days set aside every year that we say, God, I want to show you how much I love you. And it's Christmas and Easter. Those 2 days, Christians who have never stepped foot in a church will come to church so they can remind God of how much they love Him. Well, I can tell you, if that's how they're going to show God how much they love Him, they don't have much of a relationship with Him. What can you do? What can you do over the course of your week, over the course of your day, to spend time with God in a way that would alter you from the inside out? Here's what I would recommend doing. As soon as you get out of bed, and as soon as you step out of whatever your morning routine is, okay? The minute you sit down, whether it's to eat breakfast or drink a cup of coffee, even to sit down and watch the news, before you sit down and before you turn the TV on, before you turn on your phone, before whatever, you sit down and you say, God, I want to know something new about you today. And then as you go about your day, say, God, thank you for that, and for that, and for showing me that, and thank you for saving me from that. Thank you for letting me have this conversation with my coworker, with my family member, whatever. But make conscious decisions throughout the day to interact with God, whether it's by sitting down and opening up your Bible and reading, whether it's by going and finding that one devotion that you have been struggling to get through. Find something that speaks to you on a level where you feel like you are engaging with God. Listen, we right now on Sunday nights, we're going through a series with our youth that's talking about this exact same thing. Guys, a relationship with God is not something that you wake up one day and you have it. It's a journey that you go on. But only you can choose to go on that journey. If you are a Jesus follower, if you are a follower of the way, if you are a Christian, and you want to be more like Jesus, you have to make a choice to go on that adventure, to learn more about him. There's not just one single way that you're going to connect to God. There is no magic formula that you're going to put in place and make you feel like, oh, well, I connected to God really well today. No, you have to figure out for you what that looks like. What time of day is it? What scriptures? Is it music? Is it reading the Bible? Is it just being outside in nature where you can escape from all the technology, where you can just close your mind down and just listen for God to speak? Whatever it is, you have to be intentional about it. Relationships don't just happen. They take work. My wife and I got married in 2001. We are almost 19 years married. We dated for 4 years before that. Our relationship didn't just happen. We don't have the relationship that we do today because we just sat around and looking at each other. We had conversations so that we could learn about each other. I would ask her questions. She would ask me questions. We would talk about things. It's the same way with God. We have to interact with him if we want to be close to him. And the closer we are to him, the more like him we'll become, allowing us to become that marriage of grace and truth in a way that will affect the lives of the people around us and maintain the relationships that we have with them. God didn't call us to just put people on notice. He called us to love them in a way so that we could speak truth into their life and they would walk away knowing that we genuinely care about them and love them in a way that only a follower of the way can. So what does that look like for you? What are you going to do this week? What things can you shift up in your schedule to allow you to actually engage with God and not just go through the motions every day? What does it look like for you? I can't answer that question for you. Only you can. But it has to start by realizing who Jesus really is and understanding who it is we're supposed to be mirroring. In just a second, Blake and the band are going to come back up and they're going to play a song. And as this song is, as they're singing, as they're playing, obviously I want you to pay attention to what's going on. But I want you to use it as an opportunity to say, Jesus, I want to be like you. So remind me of who you are. Father, thank you for loving us. Thank you for challenging us. Thank you for pushing us. Thank you for wanting us to be seen, not for who we are, but for who you are. Father, my heart's cry is that in these next few minutes, that you will show us, each one of us in this room, how much you love us. And that you'll start to just give us little glimpses of what we can shift to become more like you. Father, thank you for loving us and setting the example. In Jesus' name, amen.